Welcome to today's Explainer. So I want you to think back to just a few years ago. When our entire educational system was basically forced online almost overnight. At the time, we all thought we were just changing how we learned, right? We're just looking at screens instead of whiteboards. But there's this absolutely fascinating 2026 paper by Dashti called Reflexivity on the Datafication of the Education System. And it reveals that we actually changed who was in control. Today, we're going to unpack exactly what went down when our classrooms moved to the cloud. And trust me, the implications here, they affect literally almost every single one of us, whether you're a student, a teacher, or really just anybody navigating the digital world today.
So who actually owns your classroom? During the COVID-19 pandemic, we all went through that massive, frantic scramble to keep education afloat. We were logging into Google Classroom, we were hopping onto Zoom, downloading whatever apps our schools told us to. But in the middle of all that panic, how many of us actually read the terms and conditions before blindly clicking accept? I mean, probably close to zero, right? Well, beneath that simple, everyday act of just logging in, there was this profound shift in power. We effectively traded our physical, tangible community spaces for corporate digital ecosystems. And as we're going to see, that trade came with some seriously hidden costs.
All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the silent data takeover, then look at the shift from owning to renting our education. After that, we'll explore the emotional side of tech, dive into the privacy illusion, and finally, we'll rethink what digital literacy really means today.
Okay, let's jump right into part one, the silent data takeover, and what actually happened when classrooms moved to the cloud.
To really grasp the scale of what happened, we've got to understand this concept of datafication. Basically, this is the progression of collecting, monitoring, and commercializing user activity data. And according to the study, this whole process progressed completely silently, but incredibly dramatically, peaking right as education transitioned online. Imagine a student just doing their homework, right? They're clicking through an assignment, pausing on a video, typing out a response. To them, they're just learning, but in the background, every single pause, click, and keystroke is being actively monitored, recorded, and potentially monetized. Learning quietly started being shaped by this corporate logic of surveillance and profit.
Now, to unpack a shift this massive, the study uses four distinct lenses, or theoretical pillars. First up is autoethnography. That's just a fancy way of saying the researcher actually lived the experience as a participant in these digital environments to get real-time observations. Second is ethics and privacy, which really questions that dangerous assumption that EdTech automatically protects student safety. Third is social justice, looking impartially at how platform access impacts different demographic groups. And lastly, affective theory, which dives into the invisible emotional bonds that we actually form with the tech we use every day.
Which leads us perfectly into section 2, from owners to renters, focusing on the underlying economics of educational platforms. Think about how education traditionally worked. It relied on tangible goods. A school bought a textbook or a desk, and it just sat in a classroom for a decade. It was a one-time sale. The school owned it, plain and simple. But today's digital economy, it operates completely differently. The paper uses this brilliant landlord analogy. Platforms today sell temporary, renewable access. Schools and students don't own their tools anymore. They're just users in a service ecosystem. They are essentially paying a kind of ongoing rent. If a school buys a software subscription, they have to pay that rent every single month, or bam, they lose access to their classroom materials instantly. Tech companies have become the new digital landlords, kicking off what the author calls platform capitalism in our schools.
And that brings us to this really powerful quote from the study. At the core of online platforms lies a question of power and agency. Drawing on the philosopher Michel Foucault, the paper asks us to take a step back and objectively consider who actually holds the influence now. Just think about it. If algorithms are the ones deciding what materials you read, how your engagement is graded, and who gets flagged for review, well, who's actually the teacher? When you no longer own the classroom and you're totally dependent on renting digital space from a tech giant, the entire balance of power shifts away from human educators straight over to the platforms. Moving right along to section 3, the emotion of technology. Because this isn't just about budgets, it's about building brand loyalty and dependency. You see, educational platforms do way more than just host a PDF or facilitate a video call. According to the study, they are actively shaping how we feel. First, they provide the digital tools, but then they start to subtly reconfigure our relationships. They change how learners, teachers, and technology interact with one another. Through gamification, the little dopamine hits you get from notifications, and just the sheer comfort of a really slick user interface, platforms create entirely new forms of attachment.
This builds profound emotional dependency and brand loyalty. Education is being reshaped emotionally. Without even noticing it, students are learning to intertwine their feelings of academic success with very specific corporate brands.
Okay, let's look at part 4, the privacy illusion. To see how these emotional bonds play out in the real world, the researcher actually did a 6-week qualitative study. During those 6 weeks of embedding themselves and observing, the researcher uncovered some pretty alarming stuff about online safety. Listen to this direct field note from the study. A student detected an app on the classroom platform from an external company that encourages students to install itself on their phones to access the classroom platform without a browser. Now, on the surface, that sounds super convenient, right? Like, oh great, a handy tool to check my homework faster. But the reality was something else entirely. Actually, scratch the convenience. Think about the implications for a second. That simple app download, which was totally marketed as a way to make schoolwork easier, was basically acting as a backdoor. Students eventually realized this third-party app gave an external company direct, unfettered access to their private academic records. And this wasn't some hacker breaking into a mainframe. This is a severe privacy breach happening quietly and voluntarily right beneath the surface of routine homework. It's a perfect example of how our comfort and our attachment to seemingly helpful apps can create this really problematic reliance. It's vacuuming up private data while we're just trying to get organized for Monday's quiz.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Rethinking Digital Literacy. Because of breaches like this, we have to look way beyond technical competence.
For the longest time, the old definition of digital literacy was strictly about technical skills. It was just knowing how to upload a document or remembering to mute your microphone on a call. But the new digital literacy, as the paper so powerfully argues, has to be an ethical and political imperative. It is simply no longer enough to just know how to use digital tools. We absolutely must understand how these tools use us. We have to develop this critical awareness of data ethics, asking where our data is stored, who is analyzing it, and exactly how it's being monetized behind our backs.
Furthermore, the study impartially points out that all of this commercialization introduces some massive social justice concerns. As education turns into a platform economy, access to learning is more and more mediated by paid subscriptions and proprietary systems. Think about the real-world consequences here. What happens to the student who just can't afford the premium subscription, or the student who rightly refuses to forfeit their privacy to some external app? The paper notes that this dynamic risks making basic educational participation completely contingent on economic privilege. It's basically creating a new two-tiered system of exclusion where these digital landlords get to dictate who gets to learn based on what they can afford.
So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one absolutely vital question to reflect on as you navigate your own digital spaces. Do you just know how to use your digital tools, or do you understand how they use you? Let me say that one more time because it's that important. Do you just know how to use your digital tools, or do you understand how they use you? Look, as the walls of our physical classrooms continue to dissolve into the cloud, it's really on us to question the platforms we rely on every single day. We have to be fiercely protective of our digital footprints and demand true digital literacy. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.